Everybody take a moment and take a breath. It's the middle of the week. E aloha no kai na ube. E aloha no ube. E ni ke aloha na ube. E kuna wa e Rika ano no vale. Everybody, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mehana. He, as most of you know, is an associate professor here at UAH in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Technology. He got her bachelor's in sociology and a certificate to teach secondary social studies in Harvard University. Thanks in 1998. Got her master's in education and curriculum studies at the University of Hawaii in 2003. Between her master's and her PhD, she taught middle and high school students in Hawaii charter schools. And then she went on to achieve her PhD in environment and natural resources at Stanford University in 2012. Mehana grew up in the rural, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Kalea district on the island of Hawaii. She is a mom of 3 kids, ages 14, 12, and 10. She has a son and 2 daughters. She enjoys playmaking, dancing, writing, poetry, and creative nonfiction, and she enjoys long mountain hikes. And we should congratulate her as she is the 2023 Stanford Doors School of Sustainability and Earth Sciences Early to Mid-Career Alumni of the Year. So congratulations. I'm glad to hear it. Ho'ai ana mahana I ka wapahi, ho'okahi kukui ke aloe. Mo'olale kukueo ina ho'omaikai, ha'ika ono hia o ku'ukumue. E kumula au koai ho'omalunai, e wa'aholo I ka ua pe'ai. I kahana I wa'oni hoku, au ahe nā maka I ke kaupu. Upua e ke aloha no ku'umākua, ho'olulu mau I ka la'i o ka iwai. Aloha. 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 And I wanted to begin with aloha for some of the places that shaped me and some of the people. That oli is actually written for my father, Gary, who Miss Blake. My dad was raised here on Oahu. He loved Oahu. He hiked every one of those bridge hikes. He also had just this sense that as a non-Hawaiian with Hawaiian daughters, Hawaiian children, he should expose us to the works of our ancestors and help us to love and give back to Hawaii. So he hiked us all over the place, Kona, across hot lava fields, following fishing trails, the King's Highway, looking for holua sleds. He also had a really strong sense of social justice and Kukeana to this place and working to take care of it. His own grandfather came to Hawaii to start the YMCA. He was a regent here, Charles Loomis, at the University of Hawaii. He helped to stop the internment of Japanese during World War II. And I think from him, my dad got this idea of working to make rights wrong. He was a proponent of Hawaiian sovereignty. He signed up for Kalahulu Hawaii, the Hawaiian nation, early in the 1980s. He would be a citizen. He wouldn't have been allowed to vote under that constitution. He said there was no problem with that. My dad really believed that anybody who loves Hawaii would understand that for islands to be governed by a continent is not sustainable. So for him, a lot of it was environmental concern as well. And with that, I wanted to thank Professor Charnet and for the seminar last week. He and I are both extension faculty, meaning that the majority of our work here in CCAR occurs outside of the university with community and government. And he focused on Lahaina and some of the underlying systems of land tenure and land use that need to shift here in Hawaii. And so this is a picture of what Lahaina once looked like. This is Moku'ula, this is the verdance of this place that fed community and was cared for by community. That really was Aina. And then of course the water was diverted for plantation agriculture. And when that was no longer profitable, there was a movement towards resort development and then sort of banking those large tracts of land for future profit, for when they could be sold or developed for second homes or other sorts of profitable ventures. So a shift from Aina to real estate, from community held to privately held, and then not being cared for in that time in a way that has such serious consequences. So today I'm going to talk about Kipuka Kukeana, communities returning to lands that are returning to communities, returning to lands in this cycle. And it's a good day because this is People Wakea. This is the equinox. So it's a time of returning to balance and restoring as the sun comes to the center. And I just wanted to start with two words, Kipuka, of course. When you have a lava flow, the Kipuka is the stand of forest that's left when the lava separates. And it's the seed bank. It's the source for regeneration and restoration of the surrounding lands. And then this word, Kuleana, some of us were in the lo'i today at Kanewai. We were remembering Anakala Eri, Ka'anana, one of my great teachers. And this is him cleaning the po'owai, the source of water, which he did every morning, rain, shine, middle of the night storm. He would check the po'owai to make sure that the water was flowing to the column. And that was part of his kuleana as the caretaker of that place. And I said to him once, Anakala, what does kuleana mean to you? And I thought he'd say it's your rights, it's your responsibilities. He said, oh, it's the aina in your family's care. Because how you take care of that place and how productive it is, how well kept, does it feed community, that lets us know who you are and what we can entrust you. So this idea that all responsibilities, all rights stem from relationship to land and how we take care of it. So today we're going to have three parts. We're going to start with lessons from my home island on Kauai. Then we're going to move to lessons from Kipuka of land returns all across Hawaii. And then we're going to look some cases of land return and land back across the world. I could sort of tell you this is adventures in Dr. Vaughan's sabbatical, because I was on sabbatical from January to June. So a lot of this work comes from that time. So I just, the lay has three parts, but there's some common elements throughout. So I wanted to call those out to you. One is that colonialism has not ended, that it continues in Hawaii and all over the world. Another is that kipuka of land are being returned. Small areas of land are being returned in ways that go beyond land ownership and that are really founded in kuleana and in creative models. And that indigenous-led decision-making, it's not enough to be the caretakers, you have to be able to make about who sells and what happens. And that when that decision-making is indigenous-led, it benefits everyone, it benefits entire communities. And that this is a really critical time in Hawaii for language. So part one, and we're going to start off with, first, would you just take a moment, take a breath, turn to a partner. If you're online, you can put it in chat. How could land return be important for the work you do and care about in Hawaii? Just think about that. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, real brief. 2 minutes. Why does this matter to you and your work? Really, can you try to give you or put up, you guys can. There you go. You want to take 30 more seconds. Come on back. See what you think to chat. Okay, everybody, come on back. All right, now that we're warmed up. So I'm going to start on my home island. This is Kauai. This is where I grew up. Where my father moved us when I was 3 years old, so we could have a rural upbringing. 9 Ahupua'a stretching Mauka to Makai. And so historically, the ohana of each ahupua'a, on my island, they do follow the water largely. That's not true on the Big Island at all. But the ohana of each area, they could access the resources, right, of that area. And so what happened when land was privatized and when the first land titles to most Hawaiians were given in 1850, was that you had, this is that whole ahupua'a Kalihiwai here. This is the one I live on the far right side there. And you see that bay. And if you follow in the next picture, you have the lower part of that ahupua'a in the same bay. And so you have all of a sudden form of title to these postage stamps of land within that larger ahupua'a, right? And only 0.2% of the lands in Hawaii are awarded formally to the Hawaiian people. So if my house is the purple house, which is beachfront, because families often did live behind the dunes where there were burials, behind the dunes, not right on the coast. This is your house, and then you have your taro patch up the valley. And so your daily, which is the other purple. So your daily commute would be to go by boat up the river to harvest your kalo, go across the bay to fish, because the reef is over here. So even though this is what you owned as a family, you continued to access the whole area really well in my community into the early 1980s. Because what the Crown did when they awarded these titles was they held back lands with the idea that this was an experiment and that the elite's responsibility was to hold the rest of the land in trust so that the system could continue, so that people could have access. And that maybe other land awards could be made over time. When this system happened, land awards were inalienable. These larger pieces of land that the Crown held, they couldn't be sold. So new landowners to Hawaii could lease them. Kalakaua made long-term leases, 99-year leases. But it wasn't until the kingdom was overthrown that these large parcels of land surrounding these postage stamps could be sold. And think about, this is how many families are now attached to a given piece of land, to one yellow postage stamp there. This is how many people, and many, many more than this, now descend from that property title awarded into the 1850s. So what started to happen is that these plantation and agriculture ventures would start to go out of business. So in this case, it's a ranch. And the ranch would start to find it more profitable to subdivide and sell. So they start to make new parcels. And in fact, if you can get one family member in Hawaii to sell of those many people in the picture, then you can force an auction of that. Now there's a new law where family members have the first right to buy, but you still have to buy out all those other owners. And your property, beachfront, might be valued at $4 million, right? But what the plantation started to do in the ranch is they would get those lands, they would quiet title those lands and then move them because they own everything surrounding. So they could buy a yellow or up in the valley, a taro patch, and they could move it onto the ridge. You see the ridge homes in the picture of the bay, and that would make more money. They can subdivide and move these parcels to a roadway, to a So you see, even these little tiny remaining Kipuka lands that Hawaiian families are holding, getting eroded, getting bought up, and then new parcels being created as the ranch splits up the land, sells it off. You can see most of the new parcels bought by residents, Hawaii residents, are in green, they're Mauka, whereas the pink ones are all held out of state, and those are more the coastal lands. And yet the ranch, which is now a development company, becomes a resort and then a development company, and now a private preserve with very luxury homes, still owns a lot of the land in this area and the surrounding lands. This is a study we did with Stanford to see who owns land in our community and where they come from. You can see the Bay Area figures very, very prominently on the North Shore of Hawaii. The Silicon Valley.com boom, there was a lot of investment in our area. We thought our land values could not go any higher until COVID, when people could work remotely and live in Hawaii. So in 1 year, we saw our median home price go up almost 60%. And this is the kind of thing that arrives on my doorstep daily, these real estate advertisements. Do you want to be a part of this frenzy? Sell your property. So we started an organization in 2018 called Kipuka, focused on perpetuating Kuleana to place through protection of family lands and cultural landscapes on Hawaii. And we do 4 things. We do research on the lands, interviewing elders, archival research on place names and stories, and then we teach about it. We bring people back to learn about those places, including local school groups, and to take care of them. So we engage in stewardship. On the top right, children are bark stripping albizia up the river in Kalihiwai Valley, because the community used to take care of that whole river and that whole waterway, but now it's private landowners. And so if we don't go and strip those albizia when they're small, they're going to turn into huge trees that will fall across the river, create dams, break, and put everyone in danger in the lower part of the valley during the flood, which we've seen happen again and again. We also work with families to protect the lands they're still holding. We help them to create land trusts, connect them to attorneys, help them to have ho'oponopono to figure out together what they want to do with their lands. We negotiate county tax breaks with them. And we also work on policies to try to make it easier to hold on to ancestral lands. This is some of the work that we've done in the past few years. And this is one of our workshops that was held in January of this year. Another big thing we do is bring families together because it's really overwhelming. They're trying to maintain traditional values and ways of taking care of place in a Western property system that's absolutely stacked against them. Some of the challenges are just the cost of land. This past year, we had to raise $2 million to buy half of a 4-acre parcel, which is what that money gets you on Hawaii. If we bought a conservation easement at 60% of the value, that's still a lot of money that you have to raise, right? So using creative strategies to bring down the value, irrevocable land trusts to make it perpetual, but still it kind of feels like we're bailing the ocean with a bucket. I'm not gonna lie. So one of the things we've done, is focus not just on keeping the lands that exist, but trying to acquire new pieces or get leases to new pieces or work with the state to find areas that families that have had to leave and give up ownership in the area can come back to. Because for every family still holding land, there's 10 others who have last. And so many families, like in this place, they're super willing for their land to be a place for camps and education programs. So this is our annual summer program focused on Aina, on eating from your home area. So the kids learn to gather food, and that if you're going to gather, you got to take care of the resources. And then it culminates with a cooking competition, Master Chef, where they feed their families lunch, create recipes, and they gather everything. And then they have to tell you, which ingredients were not local, and 5 of them, and why. And so we have a lot of fun in the summer times with this. And we've started a lands fund that is focused on having fluid funding available because real lands come up all the time, right? And lands are threatened all the time, and you have to be able to move quickly and with fluidity to try to restore these places that are much more than one family's lands, but they provide all these levels of services and benefits to the whole community. And the second part is that mapping Kipuka of community cared for lands across Hawaii. So this is something that we started in 2020 with many partners, Consuelo Foundation, Ha'oli Mauloa, Kua, Dofa, that is trying to understand the growth of community hui caring for Aina across Hawaii, what they're doing, and what we can learn from it, and what their needs are. And I really want to thank the many of you who are in the graduate courses, the year of 2 graduate seminars that we dedicated to helping with this effort. I'm not a teacher who believes you can just study something, you have to do it. So all those students, in addition to finding publicly available data on all of these organizations, over 290 organizations, 224, caring for 290 sites. They also had to go and volunteer with organizations and week in and week out work with community hui across Oahu. And they also conducted interviews with many of the groups they worked with. They also helped manage education groups. They weeded a lot. They created story maps and websites to help these groups. So mahalo to all of you. So here's what they found. One of the things they found is many of these hui came from Hawaiian activism movements and development struggles in the 70s and 80s. This is an example of evictions on the coast of Makua Valley in Waianae. And while those families were being evicted, those homeless red families, there was bombing right across the highway by the US military and live fire training in Makua. And so some of those individuals, in keeping their ties to Makua, founded Malama Makua. And Malama Makua works on demilitarization of Makua Valley. And they also return regularly at times like this, Ikowakea equinox, to conduct ceremony and reconnect community to that place. This is another example of a community hui. This is the Evalimu project. A lot of these groups were founded by elders. And a lot of them were founded to perpetuate a lifestyle learned from elders by young people who learned for people like Amakala Eddie and wanted to go have new places to farm and to put his teachings into practice. This is Uncle Henry Chang Wo. He grew up in Ewa, and he saw such a decline in the amount of seaweed on the shoreline in Ewa. And he knew that seaweed is the base of the marine food chain, that you can't have fish without seaweed, and you can't have seaweed without fresh water. So he started to restore seaweed to the reefs of Ewa, and he started a project growing seaweed, growing limu, which now provides seaweed to over 10 projects across Hawaii that are restoring coastal reef ecosystems, as well as learning to eat this yummy food again, full of nutrients. Another example from our own college and another mentor of mine, Kalani Evanson. This is a case where a family's long-held Mehana property. This is Kalani's grandmother's property in Kaneohe. And his son started to garden with him and started to invite friends to garden with him. And to honor their son, Jarrett Imai Kalani Judd, Kalani and his wife have created a community garden and an agroforestry site. And during COVID, they were a major source of food for their Kaneohe community, in a place where people could come, get out of quarantine, be outdoors safely, and also feed their families. So we have federal lands, state lands, privately held lands. I'm not going to talk about livable Hawaii Kai-Hui right now, although many of you have spent time there, so you can come back to them if we want. But they started to uphold the East Honolulu Development Plan. Elizabeth Riley put a sign up and people just got all excited about what makes Hawaii Kai livable. They started to gather at Zippies and talk story. And then slowly over time, they've started to acquire conservation easements and lands that are significant cultural sites around Maui, using very creative tools. So I just want you to look at this. It shows the growth of Aina Hui. So in 1990, we had about 50 groups. But then from 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020, there was 90 groups born each decade, 90 of these community hui. And just since 2020, we've had about 11 more, including some started by our very own students, such as Waiale'e Lakopono by Kavella Ferrant, who just graduated, which is on lands held by CTAR, Restoration of Alo'i and Aloko'i. So this is a growing movement. What do groups do? Their mission and vision statements show this word cloud. You can see that community is foundational, community-led, as well as Hawaiian and cultural aspects are very, very important in this work. Cultural preservation is the third bar. That's almost 50% of the groups. The biggest activities of all the groups are education, over 75%, and ecosystem restoration. We think of them as lo'i and loko'i'a, but over a quarter of them are taking care of marine and coastal areas. Another quarter are taking care of combination areas, gardens and farms, a huge diversity of resources, and some really common challenges. One is environmental, the threats of climate change, but also a lot of these sites are former dump sites, right? They're contaminated. Another thing is the surrounding environment, the surrounding economy. Our ohana in Kailua, they talk about operating, next to shopping centers and in a tourist economy and what it's like to restore lo'i and a heiau in that setting, and also to compete to provide jobs. How do you give jobs that allow people to have families in Hawaii? A lot of these groups employ young people, and when they have children, they can't work there anymore. We found that over half of the executive directors of these nonprofits are completely unpaid. Another challenge is sustained access to the lands they care for. Many are long-term leases. And then just capacity. You always have to run a program, do a grant for a new program, serve a new school, grow your numbers. But what about really focusing on the growth of your and really that kind of focused, sustained growth and time and energy to do that. What sustains them despite the odds? One of the things they said is networks, that they're part of networks that work together. But only 50% of them are part of the formal networks that we think of. Most of them are part of more informal networks, where they show up to each other's work days, where people who worked at a group go out and start a new group. And they're nurtured by the elder sibling, while they in turn provide inspiration and new ideas and adaptation to the elder sibling. So to end with my last section where we go global, these groups spreading us across Hawaii are a case of bioculture restoration, community-based resource management, climate change resilience, and also the resurgence of indigenous knowledge and governance and of land, which is a growing movement all across the world. Lots of action on social media. And I really like this quote, Marcus Briggs, who says, well, it's hard for us to talk about land back when we don't think of ourselves as owning it, right? So it's better to put it in terms of returning land to the traditional stewards to fulfill their inherent covenants to be caretakers of a particular place for their own canon of stories. Land back falls into many different categories. Some of them are very publicized, like removal of colonial monuments. I wanted to focus on reparations and rematriation of land, actual returns of land and restoring of sacred relationships of people and land. This is happening all across the United States, surely. These are some of the large land returns. Many of these are national parks that are being turned back to indigenous people. This idea again of land back meaning relations back. I can't talk about Kenya right now, but if you want to ask about it, we can. That's a place I got to spend some time. I did also go to Costa Rica last month, and this was a gathering of indigenous people from Alaska to South America and across the Pacific working on land back. Costa Rica has 9 indigenous groups, though they're recognized and though they are supposed to have land bases. Most of their land bases are actually occupied by settler groups, and they're just starting to activate and to occupy their lands and get them back. And this is a Maliku women's market where they've had land returned, and they've started a market where everything they make is sourced from local products. They do a lot of painting on gourds, and then they have a school. This is the Bribri, and they've recently got 500 acres of land back that was pineapple plantation. Never buy a pineapple or avocado from any other part of the world because it's a massive, massive source of displacement of people. But they've had over 50 people killed in the process of this work. And one of the things I learned is that a lot of the people in this gathering, their lives are threatened by the work they do, by the governments that occupy their places. One last thing, this is my friend Maria. She's from Guam, Vaughan. She's currently fighting a US missile range on her family's ancestral land. So I guess I want you to know it's all tied together. Things we do, things that happen in Hawaii, those missiles will be shot out of the sky by a missile range on my island. We're eating these blueberries from Peru. All of these things are all connected, right? This is the Night Tahu. I have two more examples here. The Night Tahu of Christchurch, and their work has been to reclaim lands after the earthquake affected Otautahi. So rather than just rebuilding the cathedrals and the old English look of the place, they're rebuilding Maori buildings inspired by architecture, their stories, a playground that follows water and is based on all of the akua of water, and gathering spaces. They created these benches that are arranged in a circle, not in lines, like also often benches are, so families can spend time. They're reinvigorating their waterways, restoring riparian zones, and bringing back the tuna that are their native food. And then they're also acquiring lands where buildings fell down. There was a lot of liquefaction of lands, so those lands can't be rebuilt. So instead, doing dune restoration and things that are going to enhance climate resilience. Two more. This is the Wiyot tribe of Humboldt County. They have acquired 200 acres. Tuluwat Island is the entry to Humboldt Bay. It's highly polluted. It was a shipyard and many industrial waste sites, but the tribe is working to clean it up, working with the EPA, and they've also become a landlord. They're creating housing. They're buying up houses in Eureka. They keep them off the market because they're held by the tribe, which keeps the rents low. They can never be sold. People can live in them for transitional housing as long as they need them, and then they go back to other residents, both tribal and non-tribal, who need housing. They're envisioning more sustainable housing. This is my last example today. This is the Olone of the Bay Area. This is the Suborote Land Trust. They do not own this land, but this is 5 acres in San Joaquin Park, public park owned by the city of Oakland, which they get to manage, meaning restore, steward, but also open and close. Say when it's open, say when it's closed for ceremony. They also have a lands fund, so you can log on and find out what your native land tax is. If you live in San Francisco, if you live based on the value of your property, the size of your property, the length of time you're there. So even a Berkeley student can pay native land tax, which then they use to acquire properties, including properties all over Oakland that are community gardens for food security and spaces for ceremony, spaces for education, but increasingly spaces for climate resilience. They stock water there. They catch water, they stock food, they stock first aid, that they know they can provide for their people for 10 days out of shipping containers scattered all over. Climate change is a huge theme in all of this work that I'm finding across the world. In my own community, when we flooded, community groups that held land had to go into action because every ahupua'a was separated by landslides. So whatever your local community group was, if they were the kitchen, they fed the meals. They were the distribution center, and they already knew community members. So when they went door to door to check on people, people would tell the Red Cross, "We're fine, we don't need anything." But they would tell their local community organization, "We need this. My kid needs medicine. We're getting infections. We got to get my mom to dialysis." And that's what's happening in Lahaina. The community groups in Lahaina on the ground are amazing first responders for disaster recovery. We also work with a network of community groups doing climate change resilience across the US, but I just want to highlight coastal Louisiana, where those tribes, they have to move. So they need land so that they can move their entire tribe together. If they don't have land to resettle together, then they all get scattered all over to urban centers, and they really lose not only their lands, but their community at the same time. So I just wanted to sort of come back because I really feel that the future of Lahaina should be in the hands of the people of Lahaina. And I hope that they'll be given time for that process and that we can all support. But I just hope that we can work for a future in Hawaii where that's radically different in terms of how we think about landholding and how that landholding be collective. And I just want to end with my themes, and then we should have a bunch of time for questions if that clock is right. Colonialism continues, and it needs to be offset. Real estate is one of our largest industries in Hawaii. We say it's tourism, but tourists are encouraged to buy land here. That needs to be offset, just like carbon. What if we had a buy one, give one free campaign? You're a wealthy person buying land in Hawaii, buy more and give it back. Larger conveyance taxes, all of those things, much larger lands funds to be actively acquiring land. The other thing is these groups, they're ready. These community groups are doing amazing work. and showing that they're great caretakers. How do we help to expand that? How do we help to reseed from those Kipuka to their surrounding lava on a larger scale, where they can be following entire waterways, caring for entire ecosystems? It is based in Kukeana and caretaking, and that takes people. So people need jobs at good wages. So that's a really important need. And those who are taking Kukeana and doing the caretaking should have privileges of decision making, should lead decision. And that leaves room for many forms of allyship, many forms of partnership, and also for adaptation, because a lot of this work is culturally grounded, but it's adapting every day to the realities of climate and the changes we see. And it's a really critical time in Hawaii. The military land leases are coming up before the end of this decade. And also many families who've held lands, large tracts of land in Hawaii for a century, no longer can afford to do so. The Kama'aina missionary families, they can't afford to hold lands at the prices they are now. It's a really important time to be thinking about how they come back into community stewardship. So I just wanted to end with this question, and I'll take questions. We talked about how land returns might be important for the work you do and care about in Hawaii Nei. I wonder what creative avenues you see that might make land returning to communities, returning to lands possible. So if you could turn to another partner, and people online, you can put that in chat, take a couple minutes, and I'll take a couple questions. What avenues do you see? And you can jump in with these guys or jump across. You talked about why it's important. I don't know. Question.
What are you talking about?
Well, in terms of seeing lost class.
Yeah, that's. Whenever I gave conversations like this, that's a one thing.
Yeah.
Like that's probably all it is.
Yeah.
But there is no question. What we're doing is going to put us at us there, what enables them to exist.
Yeah.
We're gonna need to see it. That's like.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to slowly come back.
Units.
Questions? What questions do people have?
So first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Vaughan for the presentation. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, so plenty of time. We do have an equivalently large online audience today, and so I'll share those questions as they come in, and Dr. Vaughan will take the questions in person. So forgive me, please, if we don't immediately take your hand. If I'm seeing a flood of questions come in online, I'll bounce off there. But no, I think I saw your hand first, and then Dr. Vaughan can take your question to start with.
No, go ahead.
My question is, has it ever been considered to have a property tax that doesn't go up year over year, so that when you buy, your grandfather in, and if it stays within your family, it doesn't change until sales, and you can't get priced out from the people around you just because values go up?
Yeah, it's a great question, and our nonprofit spent time actually as part of a student project. Law school students helped us to create a suite of options for mechanisms such as tax reform that could help longtime families to keep their lands. So we found a few things. There's examples like in California, right? Prop 13. So one thing people always worry about is that it challenges people like you, young people like you who might be buying your first house. But there was an effort on Maui. There's an Aina Kupuna bill that was passed, and our organization helped to support that. So I forget the year. I want to say 1950. If your family owns land in Hawaii before 1950, no matter your ethnic background, no matter, you have a different tax rate. There are challenges, like one thing I know on Kauai is, well, what about these huge landowners? Like, are we gonna give them a Kukeana school? Are they gonna get a tax break, right? So trying to think about, is it under a certain value? Is it under a certain size? But it's something we continue to work on Kauai. It's just tax policy is so difficult and you get all these groups involved. One thing our island has done is now there's a resident tax break rate. If you live in your house, there's a kupuna tax break rate. So that helps. We help a lot of families to bring their taxes down that way. If you own a Kukeana land, that also has a tax break. But just real challenges in getting certified. You have to certify your genealogy, Vaughan, all these things. So on Kauai, very few families have that. But it's really key because right now our tax policy is based on value, right? So if your neighbor sells, your taxes go up, and we see that happen all the time. Great question. Other questions? Other thoughts? Yes, Liz. And Liz worked really hard on this project. Thank you so much.
What would be your strategy to have those thousands of acres returned at the end of the decade?
I think it's really impossible to buy them back at market value, because I think you then would bankrupt the new stewards at the start. And the way land is set up in Hawaii, it is costly to be a steward. You need you need insurance and all these things. So again, like Noah's question too, we're operating within this imposed system that values property real differently. So I think I would continue to work with the groups that are stewarding, because one of the things is that Kukeana, you show you're a good land caretaker, then you're ready for the next step. And a lot of these groups like to grow slowly. But what I see happening is, you know, like here in Kailua, Hika'alani, they now are taking on lands around, and land is being offered to them by the state. And so I would look at areas to grow from existing groups and areas that could be acquired around them. I also would look at areas of Hawaii, and this map lets us do that have nothing. Where are places that aren't being cared for at all? And I focus efforts there. I would really encourage gifts of land back. Our organization is getting calls from people who settled in Kauai in the 70s. They came here to surf. They don't have kids. They see the cost of housing going up. They're worried about the community. They'd like to turn their land back. Right now we're not a community housing trust, land trust, like we're a land trust, but we're not a landlord like the Wiyot tribe. So that's something that needs to be built capacity for. But I would say really large investments in land acquisition, really large taxes of speculative land sales, really large taxes of very, very high value lands that are second homes, and use that to buy land back, and then work with groups to build slowly in the capacity that they feel they have, so that you can do it well. Because if you have land but you're not caring for it, it's really hard. At the same time, don't be afraid to just buy it and keep, get it when you can get it. Set up temporary things until it can be your ideal stewardship system. But make sure that steadily you're returning as much as we can. And build in money to pay people to do the work.
So we have one question online that's come in from Jocelyn. Do you see a way to get out of this imposed private property system? Or do you think it's better to try to work with the system?
I think right now we have to work within the system, Jocelyn, but it's really challenging. And so I think at the same time while we work within the system, we have to build a better system. Because over time, that better system will be ready. I guess I'll just come back to my dad. He really thought that when I graduated high school in 1993 and we marched to commemorate his first 100 years of the overthrow, that sovereignty would be restored to Hawaii within his lifetime. That was his expectation, because it just made sense. And this is what we're sort of saying, Jocelyn, is that we're existing in two systems at once, right? We have the native people of this land who are getting more and more land back, and that's sort of a nation within a nation being created, a land base that our maps show is Kipuka spreading. But at the same time, we're operating within a foreign government, the US, and that over time, restoration of the nation of Hawaii, which is a multi-ethnic and independent nation, that's going to make this work much more possible. But in the meantime, Jocelyn, I was taught work with every tool you have on every front you can. And so these are parallel efforts, and maybe the law hui of Hawaii won't be restored in my lifetime, maybe in my children or my grandchildren's life. But in the meantime, I think that government has a lot of tools that change how land is valued. And make it possible to be really, really building a land base that's cared for. Next question. Yeah.
I guess to some extent you answered this, but could you speak to how these organizations are like escalating organization against those global systems that have been imposed on us?
Sure. And I'll just also, Jocelyn, one other tool, with climate change, we just have to, there's a lot of land that has to be retired from private ownership. It just has to be. Land around riverways, land around coasts. And so, tools of eminent domain and things like that are being used more and more, and governments need to. What I found visiting around the world is that a lot of times they're dealing with the same transnational forces that are taking lands. So for example, friends from Oaxaca, and what was surprising to me is how the movement towards greener energy and sustainability is now a force of dispossession of lands all across the world. So this movement, towards blue economies and, restoring reefs and protecting reefs, well, it's kind of offsets, right, from the developed world to the global south. And so it's really infringing on remaining fishing areas. Things like Walmart building green energy plants so that they can offset their carbon is taking massive amounts of land in the indigenous territories of Oaxaca. So what I see is having the same forces working against you, like Shell Oil in Nigeria and the Amazon, allows groups to partner up and to reach across the world to work against that organization or to stand against that organization. But I also see really creative use of social media tools. That Costa Rica group I was in is focused on changing narratives around land ownership and the idea that you can change land ownership, but you do that partially by changing the stories and understandings around land ownership. And so they use really creative tools. Yeah. One group of women, they use, I don't even know, the dating sites, Tinder. They made a profile for Mother Earth because they were working on climate change awareness, and Mother Earth posted all the time that she was getting too hot, and but they used the attraction of people they knew were their age that were on dating sites, and they used it to get out messages about things they could do in their daily lives to combat climate change, both at societal and individual levels, community levels. And they kept getting shut down by the dating site, and they kept creating new profiles for Mother Earth.
We have another online question from Christian. What land back opportunities are there with the ceded land estate?
So Christian, that's a really important point. In many ways, Hawaii is in great shape in that we have Kamehameha schools, one of the largest land trusts, and then we have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and then the ceded lands. So the ceded lands were crown lands that the kingdom retained because they were so important, like Mauna Kea, like the top of Mauna Kea. They're called ceded because when Hawaii became a state, they were ceded, the kingdom lands were ceded to the state government. Right now, our state underfunds land care, right? And Clay talked about that. We underfund positions to take care of land, and we act like it's a government responsibility and a professional responsibility, and many of you go into government. But the way the system worked was all of the residents of the Ahupua'a were employed in land care. That's what everybody did, right? So I think there's great opportunities for those lands, for communities to play more of a role in stewardship of public and ceded lands. And because the issue is not who owns the land, the issue is who takes care of the land. And many of those are areas that communities have lost access to, right? That used to be a part of people's daily lives, but they don't know anymore. So I think there's a reciprocity of bringing people back to those places and offering them opportunities to help to care for them so that the lands can be better cared for, and also so that that land is returned. Clay.
Yeah, I had two questions, but the first one is related to what you're just talking about. I'm curious if, when you talk about, especially in the context of like the floods in 2018 and the Pine Fire now, and you see the like communities are rising up to kind of fill all these gaps in the needs locally. But a lot of the things that we're talking about, especially with land reform, which kind of is a whole other question, but the role that the state may have to play, either to create jobs like what you're talking about, or pay more for these kinds of actions to happen. I'm just curious, among the groups that you've worked with, do you see like, because they're becoming sort of like falling back to the self-sufficiency in the face of these kinds of disasters, like does that erode their faith and or support in the state playing a role in either making funds available or sort of reconfiguring, like if you're gonna go through reform, right, and say, okay, like you gotta change the laws, are people even in that space where like, yeah, we can do that through that mechanism?
So two parts. So what the last question too, I think another, big thing is not just the ownership transfers, but the, the lease agreements, the other ways of sort of passing care and decision making for setbacks. In Lahaina right now, my guess is they're really not ready to think about this. I can talk about our experiences on Kauai, which was that a lot of money comes in after a disaster, and it's for infrastructure. It's to put roads back right where they were. It's to put things back the way they were. And it's for buildings generally that were insured, which often means wealthier sort of groups, and a lot of local family housing is into code. And so a lot of families who lost houses in their floods didn't get insurance, they didn't get FEMA aid, they didn't get, so there was not a lot of money to rehabilitate families as much as infrastructure, and there was not funding to work on a new normal. A lot of people, tourism shut down for a year. They couldn't work in tourism. So they went into these jobs with short-term aid money, helping, visiting Kupuna, checking on them, taking their medicines. They wanted to keep doing that job, cleaning streets, but then the money dried up. So there's not funding for economic shifts, and there's not funding for long-term planning. And to say like, hey, like, who from Lahaina wants to fly to another island and spend the weekend and just feel better? And then when you're ready, like come back in a month together and talk about what you want to do. And, so I think there's ways to direct, there's massive amounts of government funding, state and federal at a time like this, but it needs to be direct in ways that are really of need. Because otherwise it's just like a flood of resources that are going in directions that don't feel. And then you do have, then you do have community just, you've already lost so much, and then you're seeing like, and that the world has to change because you just lived through just catastrophe, and then when all of the brunt of the forces to putting things back to normal, it's extra.
So we're at 4:20. I just want to acknowledge that we're at the technical end of class, and so there may be some folks who need to go pick up kids or have other things that they need to exit for. But we have addressed all the questions in the chat. Do you have a couple more minutes to stick around? I don't know if there were any final questions. I don't want to cut us off if there were one or two more questions.
Yeah.
So we can take maybe one or two more in room.
Okay, I'm gonna stick around and eat too and hang out. Get questions out of me. Anything else? Yeah, really was in the class too. Thank you, really. From Maui. Go ahead.
Kind of just building off what Clay was asking. Like, keeps coming to my mind, just the obvious rift between community and government. And all these focused community efforts often contradicting what the government is doing. And like how much I'm basically kind of what Clay asked, but like how big of a component of like the philosophy and effort of the work that's being done is directed towards working with that system that is in place that has so much conflict and resistance to the efforts that you're trying to achieve.
Well, so a couple of things, like, don't forget community is government, right? That, and government officials are generally from the community, for what you were small. And so I think Auntie Pua Burgess, one of my mentors, she says you meet with who you go to meet with. If you're looking at someone's label and position, that's who's going to come to you. But if you remember that they might also be a farmer, fisherwoman, auntie, child of someone, taking care of their elderly parents, like all the roles people have, government is made up of community too, and local government especially. So I think one of the things that came out of the floods on Kauai was stronger relationships with local government. because we had to. So we asked one community member, like, you're the government liaison, you go do that. The rest of us were cleaning houses. And picking like a trusted voice, and then also saying like, hey, this takes time, can we get back to you? And having more stronger network between your community groups that could check in with each other in ways and then get back and be a unified front. I don't know if that helps, but I think bringing government into the discussion all the time. A lot of you are going to go into government. You're going to be there. So spend as much time on the ground in the community as you can. Don't stay in your office, because you're part of the community too. Some of the changes, the long-term changes Clay asked about after the floods on Hawaii, they just took time. You know, now that individual who was our government liaison, he started a new nonprofit for a need that we didn't have. And he used to be a wedding photographer, and now he has a job running a nonprofit that does stream restoration and runs a shuttle system. So now instead of sending tourists on that highway that can close, we shuttle them and we control their numbers. And that took years to put in place, but that was always envisioned, and the floods made it possible. And now, because the community runs that system, that funds 3 separate community nonprofits that now can actually hire people in a sustainable way. So I think working with government is a really important pathway, and just building those partnerships, because these sorts of big shifts and disasters are going to keep happening. And when you build relationships, those are going to matter again and again and again. I'm thinking about it from the local, who can we reach out to county government, who can reach out state, who can reach out federal. And I do see a lot of federal groups like housing, national housing groups writing to us and saying, who can I meet with in Hawaii? How can we help to help federal funding go to the right place? Because we're an advocacy group that specializes in working with federal government funding after an event like this. So those kinds of bridging groups that they're really important too.
And I'm wondering if you could close by speaking to, we have the example with the Front Brothers of Waiale'e, which was formerly CTAR lands, a part of the land grant institution that was established in the late 1800s. And I'm wondering if you can just speak to the potential role of the CTAR lands in the land back movement, where you see that maybe going. And many students probably don't know the opportunity that exists there and the opportunity to push for change within their own college.
Sure. And this comes back to Liz's question. We don't always have to buy land back, because a lot of landowners don't actually want land. They see it as a massive liability. Homeless people are going to come camp. There's going to be, rabid dogs, and Waiale'e has a skate park and all kinds of things. And our college did not want it, and they were ready to divest it. But a student came, an undergrad from that community. And he's like, I'm here because I care about this land, and I hear it's held by this college, so I'm gonna go get a master's in that college. And he spent his master's learning all about the place, Hawaiian land records. And then we had 3 different class projects go out and help him. And go interview elders about the place, do management planning, start work days. And he created a job for himself. And now there's a job for his brother too, who just graduated last year. So it's absolutely possible. CTAR has land across Hawaii that we see as a tremendous liability. All these former ag research stations that are really deteriorating and have a major maintenance bill, right? So land has costs too. So sometimes giving land is saving a landowner money, right? In addition to the tax breaks and all that. So, so the CTAR properties are a huge option because students can help bridge to community returning there. Right now, Waimanalo has a large community presence in Waiale'e, but a lot of these other places are kind of empty, sitting there. And so those of you who are going and planting and doing nurseries there and using these spaces, it's really huge. And they're just an example of the kinds of lands that are available. There's former DOE school sites from the kingdom, scattered all across Hawaii, covered in hogwash. There's all sorts of places just waiting to be cared for. And you students really are on the forefront, whether you go into on-the-ground restoration, whether you're teaching on Aina, whether you go into policy work, whether you go into government. Remember that there's who owns the land now, but there's how can that shift, but there's also how can who's on the land, who's present, who's taking care, who has responsibility, how can that shift? How can people be reconnected? And then how can those people taking care be elevated in decision making to change things? you're gonna come up with all sorts of creative ways. I'm really excited to see what you do, and I've seen many students go out and do great things.
Thank you so much, Mehana, and thank you to all of you for being here today, both to share this message and to carry this work forward.